Now, we should say that we did request an interview with Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan, but we were told he was not available today. We are, though, going to hear from a group of MPs about this. Anita van den Belde is the Parliamentary Secretary. She is in Ottawa. James Bazan is the Conservative Defence Critic, also in Ottawa. And Randall Garrison is the NDP Defence Critic. He joins us from Colwood, British Columbia. So you folks have had a pretty dramatic afternoon. Thank you all for making time for us. Ms. van den Belde, I am, of course, going to start with you as Parliamentary Secretary to the Defence Minister. The Prime Minister said earlier today that Minister Sajjan directed the Ombudsman, Gary Walbourne, to bring the allegation to the Privy Council's office. But Minister Sajjan said today he didn't direct Gary Walbourne to do anything because that would have been inappropriate. So who's right, the Prime Minister or the Minister?
Well, I think we're parsing words here. I think what we heard today was that the minister advised Mr. Walbourne about what avenues would be open for the proper authorities to be able to look at this. But what we also heard was that the minister made sure that there was no political interference here. And he also made sure to follow up so that the proper authorities could investigate. And we also heard some very new things Minister about how he's going to fix it. He talked about an independent review. He talked about an independent reporting authority. He also mentioned that there is a new online portal where people can go to find out where to go, because that's one of the things we've been hearing. And also mention about avenues for peer support, because we know that not everybody who comes forward wants to go a sort of a punishment route. Often women come forward because they're looking for talk, they're looking for counsel. In this particular case, whatever evidence there was that Mr. Walbourne had, he did not present.
Ms. van den Belde, I do have to ask you about that, because you said that at committee too, and I just wonder, like, sometimes women just want to talk about it. Is that really an appropriate response to the kinds of allegations that have been raised over the course of the past few months?
So I think what we know in this case was that the woman in this case, and we know now since then from the media that we're talking about an inappropriate email, did not want. She wanted confidentiality. What we do
she
have
didn't
another
just want to talk about it. She brought it to the Ombudsman. It seems dismissive to me, frankly.
No, and obviously, and I don't think that the minister could have said it more strongly, that if there is impropriety, if there is misconduct, if there is a sexual assault, these are things that have to be investigated. They have to be investigated properly so that people don't get off on a technicality. They can't be investigated by politicians. They have to be investigated appropriately by proper authorities. And frankly, we can have a debate about whether or not we can have better systems in place, whether or not.
So again, I'm going to stop you. You're saying we can have a debate about whether we should have better systems in place. Do you not feel that the very allegation that you spent much of today discussing is evidence that the system is not working? In fact, would you not say it's evidence that the system is broken in this instance?
There is absolutely a deep systemic issues, and these issues have to be resolved. The minister talked, and that's what I mentioned.
Was this woman failed by the system?
And it is true, when I'm talking about different avenues, different levels of complaints need to have different ways of dealing with it. And the women need to be able to decide when they're coming forward what their comfort level is, where they want to go. And we need to have multiple avenues. And this is what the minister's talking about when we talk about fixing the system. And
so Ms. van den Belde, was this woman failed by the system? Or do you believe that this constitutes adequate help, what you've been discussing over the past 2 hours?
I think what you have here is somebody who did not want to pursue an investigation, or the Ombudsman didn't tell her that PCO wanted to do an investigation. And I think it's very clear that within one day, PCO called Mr. Walbourne.
I don't know how you could possibly know that she didn't want to pursue an investigation when she reached out
exactly.
to you.
We don't know if Mr. Walbourne went back to her to tell her that PCO wanted to investigate. Perhaps she would have made a different choice. We don't know what her choice was, because at that point, Mr. Walbourne was the only one that had who she was, what this was, and to bring it to the appropriate authority, which in this case is PCO, because it was a GIC appointment.
Okay, well, that was discussed at length. I do want to bring Mr. Bazan and Mr. Garrison have been sitting there patiently. Mr. Bazan, I do want to bring you in today. Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan was adamant that he could not be involved in any investigation, that it would be inappropriate for him to be involved because it could politicize investigations. Does he have a point?
Throughout the committee today and throughout this entire story that started over a month ago, Minister Sajjan has been disingenuous. Today he deflected and deceived. So let's not forget that, he had all sorts of tools that he could have drawn upon to do an investigation. Not directly, and, I agree, we don't want to politically interfere, but he is the Minister of National Defense. He took an oath to hold the management of the organization. And so when he has the ombudsman, in this case Gary Walbourne, coming forward with evidence, and he doesn't want to look at it, well, I can tell you that the victim, and as Gary Walbourne said at committee, the victim wanted to be assured that she had a way to be protected, because you're going after the very top soldier in the Canadian Armed Forces. What we saw with Commander Trotter today at committee was a person who acted with duty, he acted with valor and courage and bravery. And so he was able to come forward as a whistleblower, but also fulfilled his responsibilities to his fellow seaman to make sure, a sailor, to make sure that her allegations were heard. And the Chief of Defence Staff stepped aside. So, the same thing could have happened with General Vance. He could have stepped aside, but she needed, the victim in this case, with General Vance, needed to be assured that she wasn't going to face any repercussions. And they got nothing back from Minister Sajjan.
So I wonder, though, Mr. Bazan, Ms. Vandenbelde, I would like to ask Mr. Bazan about this. The minister was adamant today, the various avenues suggested by yourself, Mr. Garrison, the other members of the committee, that those were not appropriate avenues to pursue. And I just wonder at what point this speaks to a system that just doesn't work.
But the minister could have gave direction, as he's responsible for under the directives to the ombudsman, could have given direction on what to do. He did not. It's supposed to be in writing. Mm-hmm. He's failing to produce any written documentation. That's what I think the Prime Minister has been referring to, is that there was a written directive, because that's the way he's supposed to manage the ombudsman's office. That never occurred. And so he might say, well, I told him to go to the CFNIS and have the National Investigative Service and military police look at it. But we know that was impossible, because they report to the Provost Marshal, who reports to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, who reports to the Chief of Defence Staff. So the chain of command would have stopped it. So there's no independence there. And the PCO, Vashi, is not an investigative body. It's the nucleus of the Government of Canada and advises the Prime Minister.
Well, I am always charmed to be confused with Vashi Kapelos. Mr. Garrison, Catherine, I'm going to ask you that question about the system as well. Does this not just speak to a mess of a system at some point? I appreciate your questions about what the minister himself ought to have done, but it does seem, both from what we heard from Lieutenant Colonel Trotter earlier in the day and from Minister Sajjan, that the system is fundamentally not functioning as it ought to.
Well, I actually think it raises a much more serious concern, and that's a concern whether the senior leadership in the Canadian military and in the current government are really committed to rooting out sexual misconduct from the culture of the Canadian forces. Do they really understand the issue, and are they committed to acting on it? It's very clear, with 2 chiefs of defence staff in a row accused of sexual misconduct, there's something fundamentally wrong. Is it the system? Well, we learned in 2016 in the inquiry into sexual misconduct in the Canadian military from Madame Justice Deschamps that there is no independent authority to investigate things like this. Mm-hmm. So when the minister keeps saying, well, should have gone to the independent authority, there isn't one. And we've known that for the last 6 years.
To some extent, he is not independent either, I suppose, is his point, right? That his own involvement is politicization.
Well, no, he is independent. He can order investigations. No one's asking him to do the investigation. And I think that's part of what was very disingenuous about his testimony today. He didn't even want to look at evidence. And when I asked him why he didn't want to look at evidence and suggested a couple of reasons, instead of answering the question about why, he lashed out at me personally. I just really don't understand why a Minister of Defence would not look at credible evidence of sexual misconduct by the head of the Canadian military. He is, after all, the minister responsible.
Yeah, I mean, he made his argument today, which is that he felt that was politicization. I respect that you do not accept that argument, but that is the argument that he.
For 1 minute. In fact, he knew what was going on, and he referred it to the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister also took no action.
Well, so this is where I want to, Ms. Vandenbelde, we do have to let all you folks go. You're quite busy today, but I do want to finish by asking you one question, Ms. Vandenbelde, that we still don't, I think, have an entirely crystal clear answer to. The Prime Minister has acknowledged that his staff was aware of allegations in 2018. He has said that the recent reporting came as a surprise to him. But he has not been crystal clear about whether he was aware that there was any kind of allegation in 2018. Do you know the answer to that, Ms. Vanden Belde? Did the Prime Minister know anything about this in 2018, or was he not informed until he read about it on the internet in the past couple of months?
Well, I think he's answered that question.
So what's the answer?
He learned about this when it came out. And I mean, at that point, there was nothing.
So in 2018, no one in his office told him this was going on. That is your understanding of what happened.
About what there was to tell at that point. There was no evidence. There was no name. There was no complainant. And the person who
there was an allegation that was communicated about between, we know, the Chief of the Defense, Minister Sajjan's Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister's office, that there was an allegation. It is on the record that there was communication about that. We don't know about the nature of what was communicated, but we know that there was an allegation. Did the Prime Minister know there was an allegation in 2018?
And he has stated very clearly that he learned of it recently. I think the key thing is that that allegation was just that. It was an allegation. There was no evidence. There was nothing to tell. And when they tried to start an investigation, I would venture that when they say the minister did nothing, he did exactly what he should do. He went to the people. PCO can initiate investigations. They can hire people. And they wanted to do that. But at this point, what do you have? You have an ombudsman who says there's someone who doesn't want to come forward, and you have no evidence to move forward with. Very different than what we heard from Lieutenant Commander Trotter today, who had the permission of the survivor to bring forward the complaints, which of course then did lead to an investigation.
So I hear you saying that the Prime Minister should not have been told in 2018, that you think that based on what the information that we know, that it was appropriate that the Prime Minister was not told in 2018 that there was some kind of allegation. His staff had no obligation to tell him.
If something had come of it, if the ombudsman had provided the information, if there was actual evidence, that
blame the ombudsman again.
I would.
Everybody knew, and they're all complicit in a cover-up.
I would like to hear.
He said it was not actionable. I mean, the ombudsman told me in committee that it was not actionable, that it was not something that the person wanted to come forward with, and so what you have is something that is alleged, that is not actionable, and that when you want to investigate, there was nothing there to investigate further. And I think it's really important to make note of that, because what we did was we made sure that it went to the proper authority. So when you say there's no action, what happened in the end is we wanted to investigate. PCO wanted to investigate, asked the ombudsman for the information, and for whatever reason, and it could very well be that the woman didn't want to take it further down that route.
I don't think we want to assume her motives, though.
No, and that's what I said when I started. There are many, many reasons that women come forward, and we need to make sure we fix the system so that whatever the woman chooses to do, that she has a chance, and some men as well, that they have a chance to be able to guide what happens when they decide to speak out.
Okay, we're going to have to leave the conversation there today. I thank all three of you for taking the time to come on our show today.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.